and welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen, and with us for our program today is Assemblyman Will Barclay. Will Barclay represents the 124th Assembly District in New York State, an Assembly District that includes Oswego and Onondaga counties. We want to thank you folks all throughout central New York. And as you can see, we have another guest with us in studio today, and that is Ken Bush. And we, Assemblyman, turn to you and say, why do we have guest Kenneth Bush in studio with us today?
Well, it's nice to be here, first of all, Mike. And let me tell you, as you know, things can get pretty busy down here in Albany. I represent 130,000 constituents, and very often we have a lot of work that has to be done in the legislative office. And fortunately, every year we're able to have an intern, college intern, come in and work for the college semester. And I'm very pleased that Ken Bush was my intern this year in my office. He did a terrific job for us, and this is his last day, I think. So he's down here, and I said, why don't you come down and introduce yourself to the television and the people out there.
It is the last day of the 2011 legislative session. So is that code, what you just said to me, is that code that Ken made a lot of coffee this year for your office?
No, I'll let Ken explain what he did, but definitely not coffee.
He
doesn't even drink coffee.
I don't drink coffee.
Good for you. Good for you. I'm only kidding. It's kind of, I'll let you explain exactly what it is that an intern does in a legislative office.
No, a lot of people do think all I came here to do was make coffee and file paper and make copies, but really there was a lot more to it. When I first came in here, I really wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, and it's a small office, but I had a lot of responsibility. I took control of the legislation in the Albany office here, worked closely with the district office to get that done, and then I would take meetings when the assemblyman was busy with other meetings or had session and other things, other duties that he had to take care of. And at times there were a lot of busy days, especially right before the budget. There were a lot of meetings to take up, and then I would go through, and once in a while I'd have to write some letters to some constituents, and it was a very well learning experience.
Are you doing that at the same time you're taking classes, or are you pretty much away from the classroom thing at this time of year and just pretty much showing up to work
With
every
this
day?
internship, they allow, depending on the college, they'll grant you 12 to 15 credits. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to take college courses while doing this internship. And this internship is very intense, so it makes it very difficult to take college courses. They provide, once a week, you have an in-class session that lasts an hour, and there's a lot of research papers that you have to write. There's quizzes. So there is a very strenuous, intense academic part of it, along with doing your office duties. So it's really, you get in there and you get right to work.
And which school are we talking about for you?
I go to SUNY Geneseo.
In what year?
I'm going into my senior year.
All right.
Yes.
Would you, and I think you're the best person that this question can be asked, if there were people watching this program, students maybe heading off to college or maybe in college now, because we know all the college kids are watching, we just had that discussion. Would you recommend this internship to them based on the time commitment we just talked about, and you said all that you learned along the way? Would you recommend it to someone?
Certainly. I talked to a lot of students back at Geneseo about this internship program, and I would recommend it. There's two others from Geneseo. They accept any college and any major, and I know before the budget we had a lot of different colleges come in, and I would meet with them and I would talk to them about this internship program, and if it's something they're really interested in, then they should do it.
Excellent.
Well, it's important to talk about who you're interning for, too.
That's true.
Well, it sounds...
As a veteran of a lot of intern programs myself, I will say one thing about the Assembly intern program. We rely on the interns because we do have small staffs. In fact, next to Ken, I just have an assistant that helps answer the phones and does scheduling. So it is a real opportunity, I think, to dig into the state political process and understand how government works down here. So I hope Ken had a terrific time. I certainly enjoyed having him in my office. And the other good thing about it, Mike, is the fact that he is from the district too. So sometimes you get assigned randomly interns from all around the state. I've had them from Long Island, New York, all around. But this one's particularly nice because he's from the town of Elbridge, which is in the 124th Assembly District.
I was going to say, it sounds like it was more than just an extra set of hands. This sounds like Ken really got those hands dirty a little bit,
right,
and into some of the meat of some of the, issue-oriented stuff that you go through on the part of any day that you're here at the state capitol. And
one other thing you should mention, they also do a mock session. I don't know if I'm sure you've heard about that, where the interns actually pretend they're you, I guess, for the day, and they go down into the chambers and they actually do debate. And Ken, you led a debate on a bill too, didn't you? Or
I did.
Defended a bill, I should say.
I did. I introduced one of Assemblyman Barclay's bills, and it was fairly controversial, I feel like.
And he got hammered for it.
I did.
Good lesson learned there. Right?
Now you know what life is like in the New York State Assembly minority, right?
That's right.
Oh, what was the bill about?
It was a youthful offender law trying to amend what is already in practice for adults convicted of homicide and apply that to those that are convicted of homicide or adjudicated as a youthful offender.
Wow.
Yes.
So this is not just your everyday piece of legislation.
No.
This was a very intricate piece of legislation. That must have been kind of difficult. It must have been. I guess the thing I really want to know is what surprised you after going through this whole process and being here from the beginning of the year to the end of the session. What opened your eyes the most, or what would you say you're coming away with as your takeaway experience from this whole thing that you didn't know coming in, that surprised you the most, or you expected the least, sort of thing?
I think what not surprised me the most, but what I've learned most was I've learned a lot more about how state government works, coming from small town and just in New York in general. New York government doesn't have the greatest name per se, and I just assumed that's really how it was. But when you come here, the legislators are working to try to improve the state.
I didn't pay him anything to say that.
He did not.
He's doing this on his own. We didn't brief each other before we got down here. So.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking, and this is from someone who maybe had the opportunity to have a little insight, because as we discussed before the program began, Ken Bush's uncle was Bill Bush, who I knew from my early days here working at the state legislature, who was the assemblyman for that part of the state.
Yes. Well, when I was growing up, politics has always been part of my family. My uncle was an assemblyman, so for my early developing years, this is what I've learned about was state politics, and it's something I've always had an interest in. Like Assemblyman Barclay said, I'm from the town of Elbridge. My father's town supervisor there, so that influenced me a lot in going into this internship. And when I saw that it was offered, I just knew I had to experience the New York State Assembly for myself.
So you're sort of raised at the knee of politics and the political scene, but it kind of took the hands-on experience that you had this year to really kind of show you how deep it goes, right? I mean, it's not an easy or simple procedure.
No, and I think a lot of people are mistaken that it really is simple and easy, but when in the assembly there's a lot of there's a process and procedure to the way things can get done, and that's something a lot of people don't see from the outside, and it's something to be able to come into and experience firsthand.
Right. There's the drafting of the legislation. It has to sit so many days before it can be voted on. There's rules to how things get voted on. But then there's the politics of it, too. Yeah. And Will Barclay, that's got to be the toughest thing for you to explain to anybody as to why a particular piece of legislation doesn't get voted on or doesn't pass. And it's complicated.
And to follow up a little bit what Ken said, because I felt that when I first got elected and came down here, because there is a lot of notion out there that Albany is dysfunctional. In a lot of ways, I think it's appropriate. We are dysfunctional a lot. But I would say, from a whole, individual legislators are very committed to doing what's best for their districts. And that's one of the problems we get in overall in New York State, is because there's 212 legislators down here. Everybody represents different constituencies, and everybody's fighting hard for their constituencies. And unfortunately, our priorities can differ. And that's the political process. And that's why often things don't come out as cleanly as I would like to see sometimes, and I know my constituents would like to see. But sometimes politics can be the art of compromise, and that's sometimes how things get done down here, even though we don't always love the total package when it's done, but sometimes that's the way it works. So.
I hate to take you away from our guest right now, but since I feel a perfect segue coming on here, as you just led the debate on the Assembly floor on the ethics reform legislation, again, as we're closing out this 2011 session, ethics reform was one of the big pushes this year. The governor was saying, after getting the budget done and talking about the state's fiscal situation, that he wanted to see the legislature kind of clean up its act a little bit. It kind of goes back to that concept of dysfunction.
Right.
There are some who say the New York State legislature kind of leans towards the corrupt as well.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, the facts demonstrate that. We've had a number of members being convicted over the years. I think since I've been down here, 7 or 8 have been convicted of felonies. So I think there's always a need to review the ethics laws and obviously strengthen them. And I think to some degree we did that this year. Here's a compromise. I didn't love everything about the ethics bill. There's some things I would have made stronger in the ethics bills. There's some things that I think were done for political purposes and not necessarily for good government purposes. But on a whole, I thought it moved the whole debate about ethics in the right direction. It's going to require additional disclosure by legislators of penalties for people who breach the ethics laws are stronger. And I think the overall mechanism for policing the legislature and the executive branch is much improved under this bill. So I ended up supporting the bill, even though there were, there were some issues that I had with the legislation.
But the disclosures in there, one of the other things that I know upsets the public a lot is after an elected official is convicted and sent off to prison, you read the news reports
Absolutely.
About the pensions.
Right.
You know, they're still receiving their state pension. That's going to change.
Yeah, it does. It changes proactively, but I guess that's, again, better than nothing. And it does seem a little bit ludicrous as someone who's convicted of a felon for public corruption can still collect from the public, and that obviously was a good change. That needed to be done.
Ken, we're just about out of time, but one of the things that whenever I explain to people what I do for a living, and I try to explain it as best I can, and it is sometimes difficult, one of the things that I end up talking about all the time are the personalities. All the legislators, whether Assembly or Senate, they're an interesting bunch, aren't they?
They are. They really are. Everyone has their own personality and shares similar views but different. They all look out for their constituents first and foremost, which is why they're elected. And then just to interact with the different legislators is something that is very interesting, and you learn a lot from just talking and seeing where they stand on different issues and their knowledge of, because everyone has a different background and different experiences led them to why they ran.
Mm-hmm.
We're all lighthearted, humorous, no egos involved, right?
None
at all. Just looking to do the right thing on behalf of their people. And actually that's true, but one of the interesting things about that too is how different the state is geographically, upstate, downstate, New York City, upstate New York, and so on and so forth. It sounds like this was an internship that worked out pretty well for you, Ken Bush.
Good.
And we want to thank you for joining us and experiencing it. And what a nice thing for the Assemblyman to say. Yeah. Me too. Will Barclay, Ken Bush, thank you both for joining us. If you folks want to know how you can reach the office of your representative,